I'm Alice McKenzie, and welcome to Must Reads, a series of interviews with authors of recent books on preaching, which we believe deserve to be on every preacher's bookshelf. Today, my guest is Reverend Dr. John McClure. Dr. McClure is the Charles G. Finney Professor of Preaching and Worship Emeritus at Vanderbilt University Divinity School in Nashville, Tennessee. Dr. McClure is a major figure in the field of homiletics, a prolific scholar, and a person who has a profound commitment to nurturing the preaching and teaching of preaching of the next generation. I direct you to our Perkins Center for Preaching Excellence at SMU website, where you can learn more about his distinguished career and his publications. He is, I should add, an ordained Presbyterian minister and, no surprise, living in Nashville, an accomplished musician. So welcome today, Dr. McClure, and thanks for being with us.
Nice to be here.
So today our topic is your latest book, Ethical Approaches to Preaching, Choosing the Best Way to Preach About Difficult Issues. The book is an overview of 4 ways to help working preachers approach difficult ethical issues.
Right.
Communicative ethics, witness ethics, liberationist ethics, and hospitality ethics. But would you say a few words about the distinctive purpose of each ethic?
Yeah, well, a communicative ethic is an ethic in which the preacher is really seeking what I call thin moral norms that have a kind of universal quality about them. This is somebody who might be trying to do public theology within a significant kind of county seat church or a larger church where people expect someone to be a kind of public spokesperson who's trying to find those places of sort of high moral common ground between us in difficult situations. So it might be something within a crisis moment, the 911 terrorist attack, where the church is looked to for sort of public theological and ethical leadership.
Right.
So it's really preaching a communicative ethic is one in which these kinds of moral norms are sought. A witness ethic is an ethic in which instead of trying to translate the gospel into street language and find these high moral norms, one says, no, what I'm really about and need to do in my context is to cultivate moral agency. This is a kind of character ethic. It's someone like Stanley Hauerwas would come to mind. Where what I really need to be doing is developing sort of a countercultural Christian moral agency, and then witnessing. So I want my church to be a beacon of light on a hill within a community, and we're going to really hunker down on the things that make Christians distinctive and have a distinctive moral witness. This might be. I'm thinking about protest marches and street preaching and people who are really willing to hit the turf and say, there are some non-negotiables here that we Christians do not compromise on. And so that's more of a witness ethic.
Like a countercultural identity in the world.
Yeah, right. One assumes that one's identity is countercultural and then stakes that as a claim within the moral universe around us and says, Christians say this, so I'm really trying to, but success with this model is not sort of, helping people find these moral high ground together. Right. Success is that I'm developing people in my congregation who are Christ people, Bible people, within the larger world who bear a kind of strong witness for these sorts of non-negotiables. A liberationist ethic is an ethic in which issues of power are central, and where I'm in a situation where what we're really dealing with are inequities of power, which are literally destroying the lives around us, and so evil becomes more systemic in nature. So what the preacher is doing is really almost becoming a kind of critical race theorist, critical theorist of gender, sexuality, a critical theorist of ability, ableism, these kinds of things. So that kind of education loads in. And what I really want to be doing is trying to bring a sort of hermeneutic of suspicion to the way that things have been. So hegemony, that which goes without saying within culture,
Right.
is what I'm sort of trying to help people understand is not quite so power free as we might all think. So I'm trying to sort of unmirror people from their privilege and help them to understand the broad, at least within,
Right.
power broker types of.
Yeah, and I appreciated your treatment of having that hermeneutic of suspicion, both for the Bible and for theology.
Absolutely, and to some extent, liberation theologians are the theologians. This is more of a theological ethic, ultimately, within my read. These are the people who are trying to help us to say, we have to really think carefully about, the way that we preach things like forgiveness, 70 times 7, where there might be folks in our congregation who are being abused sexually or victims of domestic violence and so on, who need to think more carefully about how justice is involved in relationship to forgiveness. So we're really careful and suspect the sort of ways in which these things are preached in fast and loose ways. So we're really not, so unlike the witness ethicists, we're not just catechizing people into the Christian, becoming, sort of Christians, countercultural Christians. We're actually educating folks. We're doing what is, we're doing consciousness raising, right? What Paula Freire called conscientization. We're actually trying to raise consciousness. So critical thinking becomes, so it's a different kind of education from the pulpit that's required. But if I've got a congregation that where what we need to be doing is to think about ways to link with social movements more, and that's going to be our mission for the next 10 years situationally. Or I've got a congregation that wants to become more welcoming of, GLBTQIA persons or folks with disabilities. Then we got to get this kind of critical thinking going. And so those kinds of situations. And then a hospitality ethic is a relational ethic. It's this is my work, the Roundtable Pulpit, Leah Shade's work, others who are thinking about, well, my situation. If my situation needs for us to be developing people who are learning how to relate to one another morally and ethically around difficult issues, very slowly, and over time, how can we think about fracking that suddenly is happening in our neighborhood? This was Leah's experience. Suddenly, I mean, so we have people who work there. We have and are making their living there, and we have people whose drinking water are being is being destroyed. How do we get people together and talk about what we need to be thinking about, at a sort of interhuman level? So it's an interhuman kind of an ethic. So, so that we have to sort of ask ourselves: is that the situation that I'm in as a preacher, and is that what I need? An ethic of hospitality. So I might need a roundtable pulpit model or something like Ernesto Cardinal's wonderful, preaching model. So there, so each of these works at a different level of human experience. So it's
so the hospitality ethic seems like it builds a rhetoric of listening into
totally
no rhetoric of speaking.
Absolutely, yeah. So I actually bring into the pulpit, what I'm hearing from people. Actually shows up in the pulpit. They do. There are places of overlap, and there are a lot of different ways in which they certainly talk to each other.
Right, for sure. But one strategy I noticed across the four was that there's the use of exemplars, or examples.
Yeah.
Can you say a word about how they might function, perhaps a little differently across the four?
Yeah, it's an interesting yeah, and the whole world of sermon illustration becomes different. Yeah, and the kinds of exemplars. Yeah, so within a communicative ethic, if you're going to be uh, looking for exemplars who exemplify these moral norms at these thin places where we can all agree, human dignity. Nobody should be killed while they're just on their way to work or hanging out. So things that we can all pretty much agree on.
Right.
Um, then then we might find moral exemplars who are significant public figures within the the larger public arena around these larger topics. So those who really and you might have folks who are uh, non-church people, right, can actually exemplify gospel. Imagine, right?
But maybe
Um,
not so much in the witness ethic, right?
yeah, but then you get to the witness ethic, and it's really Bible person or Christ person who becomes the main exemplar for us, right?
Mhm.
And then and then you get to a social ethic like a liberation ethic, and there are just and here there are just tons of anonymous Christians all around us, right? So this is how, because we're linked up with social movements, then ordinary people who are social movement people, right?
Right.
Or it could even be somebody who is Christ to me, who is utterly powerless, right?
Hmm.
So Christ in the face of the person who who has absolutely no power at all, who teaches me and then unmirrors me in terms of my own privilege.
Hmm.
And then in a hospitality ethic, well, it could just be anybody in your church, or if you've got a group of who are preaching and you're involving other people in the community, their stories,
Hmm.
the narratives they tell about their lives in relationship to this difficult issue become absolutely crucial because we're welcoming their voices into the mix. So yeah, they're very different. I mean, just illustration and exemplars change across all of these.
Hmm.
Uh,
Hmm.
and if you want to hunker down and be utterly consistent, when I teach this, I actually have to be very consistent.
I know. Yeah.
Just for fun. I mean,
Right.
nobody is completely ever totally consistent in their preaching, but
Right.
it is interesting to just talk with them about, oh, well, you had that was a Bible Christ person, and here you are in a liberation ethic.
Right. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
anyway, but
Yeah.
it creates some interesting conversations
Right.
about how we illustrate where we go for the
Right.
kinds of gospel exemplars. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. That was just an interesting thread that glimmered for me in terms of going through all.
Glad that came through.
Oh, good, good. So I also want to point out that the book has additional, and every chapter has an additional list of reading if people want to explore more deeply. So I
Yeah.
guess my last question is what's a key piece of advice you would give, or encouragement / advice to preachers preaching in these difficult days on difficult issues?
Yeah, well, it's very much for me. Read your situation, right? Read. I mean, I'm a strategic, practical theologian. I mean, all of my professional books, the Four Codes, Claiming Theology in the Pulpit, gives a range of options, and then says, read your situation and ask. Then say, what should I be doing? What's the best way to do something? So I would say, think about what's most needed in your context right now around whatever issue it is, that's most pressing in your community, um, and read that situation carefully, and then ask yourself, what's needed? Do we need to be building interhuman moral relationships? Do we need to join up forces with people outside of the church and have a liberationist ethic? Do we need to sort of say, no, we have non-negotiables and we need to hunker down? Or if we're a communicative ethic, do we need to really become a public voice, helping people find common ground around us and so on? So I would say, read your situation and then decide what's best, right? And realize there are options there, and they're wonderful reading. This book grows. I mean, this is not me. I'm organizing what our guild is doing really, really well, and has for the last 30 years or more, and just trying to say, let's learn how to be practical, theologians, in how we, strategic practical theologians in how we do this, and not just, I just need to kind of do something, and
Yeah.
What am I going to do?
I have to say something. So
yeah, I have to say something. What am I going to do?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, we have a wonderful group of scholars who have put together a lot of great insights, and so yeah, and the book is meant to be a handbook for a class, and then you read other, you read into the literature. I tried purposely not to say everything.
Right. Well, we want to thank you for this practical and profound book, Ethical Approaches to Preaching, Choosing the Best Way to Preach About Difficult Issues. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thanks, Alice.